So thank you everybody for coming. My name is Jerry Chan. I'm the regional manager for Japan and South Korea for Bitcoin Association. And Bitcoin Association is a nonprofit organization founded for the pure purpose of outreaching to the enterprises, the industry, making sure everybody outside of Bitcoin and blockchain space have access to the developers, to the projects, to the startups, to the technology being developed in blockchain and Bitcoin. With very specific focus on Bitcoin SV, which is the original Bitcoin. And so as part of that initiative, Bitcoin Association has started this enterprise outreach sort of seminar series. This is the first inaugural one. This is kind of the pilot. If it works here, we're going to try to replicate this throughout Korea and Asia and the rest of the world. And as part of the series, we do want to bring in speakers who want to talk to those of you in the industry who are not of Bitcoin, who are not of necessary blockchain. Some of you may be, but we do want to actually explain why this technology is actually useful for the world in general, for governments, for accounting, for law, for legal, for tracking, for fraud prevention, all that kind of stuff. So as that is our sort of a mission, I'm very happy to have as our inaugural sort of seminar Dr. Craig Wright, who's AKA Satoshi Nakamoto. So we'll get all that out of the closet right away. The inventor of Bitcoin, to basically talk to us about a couple of topics. First of which is a little bit about why Bitcoin, why was it invented after all, and secondly a little bit more about a lot of the misconceptions which a lot of blockchain people get confused with, which is like code is law. You know, a lot of, if everybody's heard of Ethereum, the big push of Ethereum is that, you know, code is stronger than law, right? Code should be law, and people who are developers eventually become, I guess, lawyers, judiciaries, judges, and that's a big misconception, and how blockchain is not supposed to work outside of the purview of the legal systems in which you live in. So to kick it off, I guess we'll introduce, you know, Dr. Craig Wright, sorry, not Mr., Dr. Craig Wright. And we'll have a quick sort of jump-in introductory, a sort of fireside chat, and we'll sort of break this up between his talks. But the first, we'll have like a little sort of like coming out of the closet reveal. I know we've done this in CoinGeek conferences, but in the past couple of months, but I don't think we've done this particularly for an audience such as this. Right, because
well, we've done a variety of them, but
yeah.
Different bits and pieces each time.
Yeah, you've spoken to the Oxford Society and Cambridge Society, but you did a talk at Oxford Society as well.
That was a different thing. I was doing an academic presentation at Oxford.
Okay, but this sort of fireside chat, kind of like a, you know, tell-it-all thing. We started only at a couple of CoinGeeks ago. When I say we, I mean like, you know, CoinGeek. But I think it's good to actually address an audience which is more industry, you know, executive level, enterprise folks who are not necessarily, you know, committed in blockchain, Bitcoin. They're just kind of like, hey, tell us about this technology. So let's get the first question out of the way. So, okay, did you invent Bitcoin?
Yes, I invented Bitcoin.
Okay, why Satoshi Nakamoto?
It's actually an interesting story that I've actually written about. The second part is the most important. Nakamoto was a Japanese philosopher in the Tokugawa period. He wrote about history, and also he was a merchant philosopher. So in a vein similar to Adam Smith, he talked about the need to open up and liberalize trade. Unfortunately, he did that at the time of the shogunate, when people were closing down Japan. So Tomasu didn't live a long life. He died in his 30s. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to have a long, productive life like Adam Smith, where he died a old man, peacefully because he fought for his convictions and his beliefs. And he believed that Japan needed to be a strong nation that would trade with the world. Unfortunately, the shogun didn't actually hold the same beliefs. And, well, that's a little bit of a sad story. The other part...
Yeah, the Satoshi part.
Satoshi has multiple reasons. So Satoshi is actually in the House of David. He was adopted. The House of Morgan, David there, which was a play on a friend of mine. But on top of that...
House of Morgan is J.P. Morgan's
Morgan
book,
yeah.
by the way.
And on top of that, though, the phoenix was a symbol for, from The Economist, of the rising of a new global cryptocurrency, which was back in the 80s. And Ash, a Pokemon trainer, there's always this phoenix there, which is the final thing in whatever else. And strangely enough, Ash is in Japan called Satoshi.
It's Japanese people can confirm that, right? Is it? Okay. So Satoshi came from, but there was also something about history. Like
yeah, that's Nakamoto. So Nakamoto also wrote about the sort of lack of consistency in history. One of the things he wrote about in Ramblings of an Old Man was he was looking at the analysis of both Shinto and Buddhist and Confucianist scrolls. And he talked about how the meaning of words changed. So, especially in Shinto, people were taking different meanings for some of the scrolls over time, and they were rewriting them differently. So as they actually, with the scrolls, had to, well, basically paint a new version, people were changing what was actually being said. And he was really disappointed in that over time, the meaning of what some sage said would actually vary. So you would actually have some things that were completely different stories as they evolved.
So I can see that's somewhat significant when you were talking about blockchain being an immutable record or ledger.
So you have something that doesn't change over time. It's a source of truth.
So what are the, what could Nakamoto or Tomiyasu, sorry, I don't remember the guy's, that philosopher, Nakamoto, what could he have done if he had an immutable source of history, source of truth back then? What would...
You could start writing history, not just a single word, but explaining what you meant at each time. So in English, we have many words that are changed over time. And for a lawyer, it's different than general populations. For instance, the word fungible. The word fungible has been taken to be a totally different thing than it really is in monetary law to what it is to general use. In monetary law, the word fungible represents something such as a negotiable instrument that is issued and exchanged for valuable consideration without knowledge, so that when I buy goods and services, if someone pays me using a note and I have no indication that there's fraud, criminal activity or anything like that, then that is a valid exchange and that the money can't be seized. Similarly, if I'm gifted money, then money's never negotiable, and people don't understand the difference.
Going back to the whole pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto then, why did you choose to use a pseudonym and not just publish as Craig S. Wright?
I've used pseudonyms since I was actually quite young. It was something not to hide or anything like that, it just goes back to my past. So back in the 90s, when I was arguing with the likes of cypherpunks, including Julian Assange, I used, at that point, Doshgate, which basically means incorrigible, can't be changed. So
You're trolling him.
yes, I was. But I've used Japanese pseudonyms right back from the 80s on, and it wasn't about hiding. It was more about, in my professional work and whatever else, I would act as me. But when I'm creating things and releasing it, I didn't always want to have the negative associations. I mean, I worked in a audit firm. I worked for BDO. And before that, when I was acting commercially, I worked with the stock exchange in Australia and other such entities. So there were two different views of what I was. And my professional side, well, doesn't mean I want people to see what I'm doing outside. And although Bitcoin is effectively the best audit technology in the world, I believe, it's not something that people will understand readily.
And so when you released it, and I guess cypherpunks took this, ran with it, sort of made their own interpretation of its intent, why didn't at that point you try to, sort of rein it back in to the original goals?
I was actually very disappointed in the beginning. Unfortunately, when we're talking about trying to push use and things like this, I created Bitcoin to be something that would, for the first time in human history, be a digital currency that would act in the law, would be not really something that criminals would want to use. If you look at Mark Twain Bank, DigiCash, eGold, everything else, all of these systems failed because they became more criminal than anything else. eGold was a good idea until you realize that 99.8% of use was criminal activity and money laundering. DigiCash was a great idea. They were actually one of the early banks, first cryptocurrency bank, Mark Twain in the US, tried to actually do AML and act in the law, but all the customers didn't, and they started having people sign up and breach the law. So I sought to actually make Bitcoin something that would enable growth and enable businesses and enable people to create honest systems. Yet what happened, the first actual business that anyone tried to create in August of 2010 was a heroin store. And I mean, I had the argument back then, and I mean, it could have been a marijuana store. In Vancouver, marijuana is illegal, but you can't get banking. I'm not saying marijuana is right or wrong, but these sort of things that are legal but unbanked would have been a good introduction to Bitcoin. Yet people said, no, heroin. And I don't care what people say. We've got a right to our free bodies and whatever else. Heroin's a horrible poison. Phenol is a horrible poison. And there's no place for it in this world. I'm sorry.
I think on that note, given our introductory time is elapsed, we'll pause this sort of dialogue, conversational dialogue, and we'll let you have your first talk since you've pretty much, segued yourself into it. So we'll give you the floor for 20 minutes where you talk about why Bitcoin was created, and then we'll continue the conversation on afterwards.
So why? We have a blockchain. It's an immutable evidence store. This is where people misunderstood. And unfortunately, Bitcoin was launched at the wrong time. I'll say that very simply. It wasn't launched because of the global financial crisis. I started developing it before that. I wasn't prescient and said, ha-ha, the American government's going to cause a whole lot of collapse in the way that they're doing housing loans, etc. I'm going to create Bitcoin. No, I didn't. I'm not that prescient. I don't sort of time travel or anything like this. I created Bitcoin to actually enable traceability in money. Before I was an auditor with a company called BDO. I worked on the development of software, including CATs and DATs, which is computer-aided audit techniques, and I was involved in auditing public companies, looking for fraud, doing the Enron type things that brought down Anderson's. And transparency is a huge problem. It's massively difficult for organizations to actually know what's happening in their own organization.